Hi everyone, welcome to the demo session on Azure Blob Storage Service Provider Connector for Logic Apps Standard. We'll have a quick look on the different components of Azure Blob Storage, creating a connection through different authentication methods like connection string, AD/OAuth, and managed identity. We'll go through the trigger architecture and different ways to troubleshoot trigger failures. We'll have an overview of different actions available. We'll go through a detailed demo on connecting to a blob storage when it is behind firewall. We'll have a look at different app settings and host settings we can configure specific to this connector. And we'll have a look at some of the troubleshooting options as well. Binary large object or blob is a collection of binary data stored as a single entity. Azure Blob Storage is Microsoft's object storage solution. It has a storage account, a container, which is similar to a directory in a file system, and there are different kind of blobs like block blobs which store text and binary data, append blobs which are optimized for append operations, and page blobs which can store random access files. Let's see how we can create a blob and author a connection from Logic App to the blob. So right now I'm at the storage account, and here are the containers, and you can create a new container by clicking on this, and there can be multiple containers under a single storage account. You can provide a name to this, and then once you provide the name, and you can specify the access level for this. There is either public or blob or container level or private access. And once you have the container created, you can upload the new blobs to this from here. You can either drag and drop the files or upload the files from your local file directory. And going back to Logic App, okay, this is my Logic App. So for creating the connection, yeah, I already have one connection created. So for creating a new connection, we do have three different authentication types. You can choose connection string. You would have to provide the connection string of the storage account. This you can get from the storage account. So if you go to storage account and click on the access keys, here you will see the connection key string, and you can copy this and put it in the connection creation. So there are other authentication mechanisms like AD/OAuth and managed identity. When you click on managed identity, you would have to provide the endpoint of the blob storage. So this would look something like this. So if you go to any of the container, see this is the container, and let's see how the URL looks like for this container. So this will be the name of the storage account .blob.core.windows.net. So this is the URL we have to provide at the managed identity identification. So once you provide this and provide a name for your connection, you can create the managed identity connection. For the managed identity authentication to work, you should have a managed identity enabled at your Logic App. For that, you can go to Logic App, and then you can click on the identity here, and you can either enable system assigned or user assigned identity. So, and you have to provide access to this identity that you can provide either from here or from the storage account page. So you can click on the Azure role assignments here, and you can look for the role what you want to add. So now we are using the blob, so you have to choose the scope, like scope, what is the scope of this role assignment, and choose the resource which you want to choose, and what is the role you would like to add. So this scope can be either at the resource level or at the subscription or resource group level. And the role, based on the operations you're performing, you can give the blob data contributor role or blob data owner or reader role. And you can click on the save button. So this is about the managed identity authentication. And in case you're using the AD/OAuth, let's create one. So you would have to have an AD/OAuth registration, AD app registration performed, and you have to provide the details of these things. So for doing the AD app registration, you can go to app registrations and click on the new app registration. So I have one created already. So once you create it, you would have to copy the client ID and the tenant ID from these settings, and you can either do a client credential through a certificate or secret. So you can click on this and create either a new secret or add a new certificate here. So once you create a new new secret, you can add the expiry date for that, and then you have to copy the secret value. So those details you have to provide here at the Logic app. So the tenant ID, client ID, and you have to choose the appropriate credential type, either certificate or secret, and provide the client ID and the secret here. Service provider blob trigger is implemented on Azure function trigger for blob storage. There are different kind of function trigger implementations, and Logic App uses the default trigger behavior, which relies on polling the container for updates. I have created a simple diagram on how the trigger polling works. Scale controller is responsible for polling the data. So for every blob operation, there would be an entry in the logs folder in storage accounts. So polling works as a hybrid between inspecting the logs and running a periodic scan on the container. Polling frequency would also differ based on the availability of data. Once scale controller finds the data, it adds a metadata to an Azure queue, which is created specifically for the trigger purpose. And once there is an data in the Azure queue, it will trigger the Logic app. So the Logic app will go to the container and retrieve the blob. So this is how the trigger works. There are few other concepts which are important, like blob receipt. So Azure function runtime ensures that no blob trigger function gets called more than once for the same new or updated blob. To determine if a given blob version has been processed, it maintains blob receipts. So to force reprocessing a blob, we need to delete a blob receipt from the Azure Web Jobs container manually. And there is something called poison blobs. So when a blob trigger function fails for a given blob, Azure function retries that function a total of 5 times. This retry number can be configured as well. If it fails for all the retries, then Azure function adds a message to a storage queue named web jobs blob trigger poison. So these are the poison blobs which get added to the poison queue. And concurrency, so blob trigger uses queue internally, right? So the maximum number of concurrent function invocation is controlled by the queue configuration, which is in the host.json file. And this can be modified based on the need. Once you create the blob trigger, these are the places where you can see its footprint. Yeah, the first one here, it creates a blob receipts folder, as I mentioned earlier, under the Azure Web Jobs host container on the storage account, which is associated with the Logic app. Here you can see multiple different folders created. The folder name here is the e tag of the blob. So if you would like to delete reprocess any particular blob, then you have to delete the corresponding folder here. And under the queues on the same storage account, you will have a queue created for the purpose of triggering the Logic app. And in case there are any poison blobs, there will be a poison queue created as well. And under Kudu, you will have a log file created, which would have the details of each trigger execution and the names of the files that are processed. This would be more helpful in troubleshooting any trigger related issues. Let's create a blob trigger in Logic App and see how it works. So I have the trigger selected here. So this is the only parameter it is looking for. Blob path is the path to the container. Yeah, this can have the container name slash some of the filters as well, like if the name starts with a particular field, or if the name has the extension, specific extension. So let me give this path. So this is the path I have. Here, this is my container name, and I'm looking for the blobs which has the extension .msg. So we can either provide something here as well, so that will look for like the blobs which has the name starting with the test hyphen. Okay. So now let me save this one. Let me go back to my storage account. So this is the container where I'm triggering the Logic App with. So this has different files, and there are two files with the .msg extension. And going back to Logic App, so it should automatically trigger when there are files available. So meanwhile, let's check whether the container is created for the blob receipt. So this is my Azure Web Job Host container. So if you go back to Azure Web Job Host, this is the blob receipt folder, which has the Logic App name. Under the Logic App name, yeah, this was an existing Logic App workflow, and this is the new workflow which I created. So there is a folder created for it. So if you see, there are two folders. This is the e tag of the blobs which I have uploaded. So if you open one of these, so you can see the actual blob here. So test.msg, and there should be one more, which is sample.msg. So there are two files which have been processed. So let's have a look at the queues as well. So there is a queue created for the um, triggering of the Logic App. So let's go back to the Logic App and see the run again. Sometime may not load. So going back to the overview might load it. Yeah, here you can see there are two runs available. Let me open the run. So these are the details of the blob which has been triggered. There is a wide range of actions available through Blob Service Provider connection. We can read, delete, or upload the content of the blob, list blobs and list containers. We can get the metadata of containers and blobs, copy blob from one container to another, get blobs SAS URI, and we can even extract the archive to a folder. Yeah, here we can have a look at some of the actions here, like list all blobs. Here we can provide the blob prefix path and the page marker as well, and upload blob. We can just pass the content and the blob name, and yeah, we can choose if we want to overwrite. Um, Coming to read blob, it just takes the blob name as a parameter, blob name and container name as the parameters now. And you can even check whether the blob exists by providing the blob name. Uh, for copy blob from source to destination, yeah, these we have to provide the source and destination container names, and these both containers should be present, otherwise it would throw error. And getting blob SAS URI, yeah, we can generate the SAS URI for the particular blob. We can provide other parameters also, like start time, expiry time, and shared access protocol. This is similar to what we usually see in the storage accounts SAS generation portal, where we provide all these details and can generate the SAS string. Similar to that, we can do it through Logic App as well. And we can get the blob access policies that are defined for the particular blob. We can even set the access tier for the blob as well. Yeah, in this run, we can see list all blob is listing the metadata of all the blobs present in that container, and check the blob exist will give the Boolean output. Copy blob from source to destination will give the details of the destination, and get blob SAS URI will give the SAS URI of the blob, and blob access policies will list the access policies available. When storage account is behind firewall and in the same region as that of Logic App, local communication in the data center abstracts the internal IP addresses. So just permitting the traffic through IP addresses might not be enough to successfully allow the communication across firewall. In that case, we would have to follow the below steps. We have to create a private endpoint in a storage account for the storage service. In our case, this is a blob service. Enable VNet integration on Logic App. add private endpoints subnet to trusted list in the storage accounts network settings, and also we need to add logic apps subnet to trusted list in the storage accounts network settings. Let's see how this can be performed. Yeah, if you go to the networking tab of storage account, earlier the access was enabled from all the networks. Now I have disabled it and enabled it only from selected virtual networks. Let's test it out from Logic App whether it works fine. So if I run the trigger here, while it is loading, I think I can go back to private endpoint configuration. So now for this to work, we need to create a private endpoint configuration. Yeah, I have one available for table. So, but in this case, we would have to create for the blob. So I'll create a private endpoint here. So you need to give a name, and then the region where your VNet is present. So I'm choosing the region, and you have to target the resource type, what you want to choose. So here it would be blob, and we'll choose the virtual network. So I'm choosing the VNet in the same region and one subnet, and configure the DNS, creating a private DNS zone here, and then we'll create the private endpoint. Yeah. While this is getting created, let's have a look at the Logic app, what happened to the run. Go back to the overview here. This is taking time to load the run. Meanwhile, I'll show the VNet integration configuration. So if you come to Logic Apps Networking tab, you can see the VNet integration option here. You can click on the VNet integration, and if there is no integration already available, you can choose the VNet. You can create a new VNet or choose the existing VNet and a subnet which is not associated with any resource. Right now I have integrated with this VNet and chosen a subnet. Uh, and we have to choose the route all as enabled so that all the traffic go through the VNet. And if you go back to Logic App, let me check the runs. We'll check whether the private endpoint is created. Yeah, private endpoint is configured already. So let's go back to the storage account. So now we have a private endpoint configured, and we have the VNet integration enabled. So since these two are in different VNets, we need to add these VNets in the allowed VNet list. So we'll choose the VNet from this tab. So this is the VNet where my Logic app is integrated to. I'll choose that and choose the subnet, and we'll add it. Similarly, I need to add the VNet where private endpoint is configured. I'll choose the VNet here, and the subnet where I have this. I think this is the one. We add it. Click on save. Let me confirm the subnet name from this one. So here you can see this is the subnet name. So I need to configure that subnet here. So I'll change this. I had chosen a wrong subnet earlier, so I'll choose the subnet where the private endpoint is configured. So this is the one, and I'll click on add. So let's check if the runs are loading. So we have to save the configuration here at storage account. Once this is saved, we can do another round of test here. So see, this run has failed. Let's see the reason for the failure. So this is failing with forbidden error because we did not have the private endpoint configured at that time. So if we go back to blob storage and run the trigger again, so it should process this time. So this might take few minutes to reflect here. So we'll test it after a few seconds. Yeah, we can see that the run is succeeded. These are some of the configurations which can be modified through app settings for blob storage connector. It is not recommended to modify them unless really required, and better to test the performance if we are increasing any of these limits. We have cloud blob client cache size, and we can modify the expiry time for this as URI. We can modify the results size for the list blob and list container actions. Settings applicable for blob trigger. Since blob trigger uses Azure queues in the background for polling, some of these settings are controlled by Azure queue configuration. These are some of the common errors we can come across. In case of 401 unauthorized, if it is a connection string authentication, verify if key rotation is performed at the storage account. And for managed identity or AD auth, make sure that the proper RBAC access is provided for these service principals at the storage account. And for 403 forbidden error, if storage account is behind firewall, make sure that the private endpoint is configured for blob endpoint, and Logic Apps VNet and private endpoints VNet are added to the allowed list. For 400 bad request error, verify that container or blob which we are looking for is existing, and make sure that the provided path is valid. And for actions like container or blob updates, verify that the input is valid for corresponding action. And if you're seeing 409 conflict and 412 precondition failed errors, these are the errors thrown from the blob storage service. We have a very good list of blob storage error codes in this link, and you can look for this link for different reasons for this error. And in case of trigger failures, we can check the kudu logs in this path, home log files, application functions, and blob trigger. And if the trigger is being skipped, we can verify if the blob receipt is created under the blob receipt folder, which we discussed earlier. This is all I have for the demo today, and thank you for watching.